Ashes were supposed to stay dead. The Galactic Council chamber dimmed as ancient coordinates flared back to life, a star system reasserting itself where doctrine said there should be none. Earth. The name carried no weight anymore, just an archival, appended with a date and a verdict. 4,000 years since eradication. 4,000 years since the Council had voted unanimously that humanity was no longer a variable worth tracking. Now the system was transmitting. Councillors watched sensor feeds populate with an air of detached curiosity. One star, no protectorates, no tributary traffic. A formation of ships translating in from deep void, their drives loud, inelegant, unrefined by modern standards. Hulls appeared layered and blunt, armor plates visible to the naked eye. Weapon apertures were external, unapologetically kinetic. The fleet numbered 68. Laughter followed, restrained but sincere. Relics, one councillor said, flagging the annotation. They survived by hiding, another pulled up the extermination record, replaying it like a settled argument. Orbital sterilization, crustal fire, population reduction to 0 within 19 hours, Earth's biosphere reduced to ash and debris, its system quarantined and marked erased. The Council had moved on to larger concerns. The galaxy always did, obsolete. The classification updated automatically beside Earth's marker, threat index negligible, estimated compliance time should reintegration be required under 7 hours. Processing protocols populated the display, population, containment models extrapolated from pre-extermination census data, adjusted for optimistic survival estimates. The number hovered at 6.2 million, a rounding error on a galactic scale. Someone remarked on the irony. 4,000 years, they said, and this is all they have to show for it. The censor chief noted anomalies and was ignored. Power signatures were dense, not graceful. Heat dissipation was aggressive, bordering on wasteful. There were no energy shield harmonics, consistent with Council defense doctrine. The ships held position just inside the old exclusion boundary, exactly 3.1 million kilometers past the line drawn when Earth was sentenced. They don't even remember where they're allowed to exist, a delegate said. A visual feed resolved briefly before being minimized. Human bridges looked austere, built for function rather than display. Crews moved with unhurried coordination, no panic, no ritual. No attempt was made to broadcast greetings or petitions. The silence was interpreted as ignorance or fear. The Council convened for 11 minutes. That was longer than necessary, but tradition demanded formality even when history repeated itself. Reintegration authority was granted as a courtesy, not a concern. Escort fleets were authorized at ceremonial readiness, 14% power allocation, no kinetic arming required, extinct species. The tag lingered on the display, unchanged, despite the contradiction drifting quietly at the system's edge. No one bothered to remove it. Earth had been erased once. If remnants existed, they would be corrected again. A junior councillor hesitated, voicing a question about survival probability. After total sterilization, the response was immediate and sharp. "Probability already resolved," the presiding councillor said. "We know how this ends." The reintegration notice queued for transmission, its language softened to accommodate a species presumed fragile and grateful. Compliance windows were generous, enforcement contingencies were academic. The Council expected surrender, confusion, perhaps belated rage. None of it mattered. 4,000 years meant nothing. As the notice launched toward the returning fleet, the Council settled back into routine. Earth was a solved problem, resurfacing briefly before disappearing again. Ashes, after all, did not argue with history. The Council spoke as if the verdict were still binding. 6 diplomatic bands opened in unison, their harmonics layered to convey authority before meaning. The reintegration notice unfurled with practiced elegance, citing precedent, jurisdiction, and the historical necessity of Earth's extermination. The language was careful, almost kind. Humanity's destruction was framed as corrective action, regrettable but lawful, a lesson administered for galactic stability. Compliance windows followed, processing options, an offer to exist again, conditionally. The human fleet waited 41 seconds before replying. When the channel resolved, it carried none of the Council's ornamentation. A narrow band signal forced priority by strength alone. The image was steady, a human command bridge, dimly lit, functional. A single officer stood centered, hands clasped behind their back. No insignia, no appeal. "We acknowledge receipt," the officer said. "Your notice is invalid." A ripple of surprise crossed the chamber. The presiding councillor responded immediately, reiterating the Council's authority and reminding humanity of the historical record. Earth had been erased for violations of Council law. That decision was final, ratified by unanimous vote. Humanity's survival, if genuine, did not retroactively change the law. The human officer listened without interruption, then spoke. "You did not judge us," they said. "You erased us." Silence followed, brief and brittle. The Council attempted correction, citing legal definitions of extermination as enforcement, not malice. The officer shook their head once. 19 hours, they said. "That is how long it took you to burn our world. We have the records. We remember every minute. No right to judge." The line appeared as a text echo across auxiliary channels, flagged as rhetorical deviation. A senior councillor leaned forward, voice tightening. They spoke of numbers: 14,000 council vessels within response range versus 68 human ships of obsolete construction. They spoke of inevitability, of mercy through submission. The implication was clear. Refusal would only repeat history. "Your numbers are accurate," the human officer replied. "Your authority is not." The council escalated to legitimacy, asserting that survival did not absolve past crimes. Humanity's continued existence was conditional upon acceptance of council oversight. The officer's reply was immediate. "We do not accept your history," they said. "We do not accept your verdict, and we do not recognize the legality of our destruction." A countdown marker appeared unilaterally on the shared display. 7 hours to compliance, generous by council standards. The human officer glanced at it once. "You are speaking to the wrong century," they said, "and the wrong species." The presiding councillor demanded to know what authority humanity claimed after 4,000 years in ash and silence. The officer's answer was quiet. "The authority of survival," they said, "and of restraint." "We are still here." The punchline hung in the channel, unsupported, unadorned. The council issued a final clarification, offering protectorate status in exchange for acknowledgement of the original judgment. The officer waited until the last word. Rendered. "There will be no acknowledgements," they said. "Any attempt to board a human vessel will be treated as an act of war." The transmission ended. Across the void, human ships held position, vectors clean, power curves steady. Council tacticians marked the stillness as hesitation. Orders queued for a demonstration strike at minimal yield, enough to remind a forgotten species of its place. The Council had spoken law. Humanity had rejected the premise. The Council answered defiance with instruction. At 0148 engagement time, 3 Council cruisers elevated power output to 18%, the minimum necessary to demonstrate inevitability without erasing a presumed relic outright. Energy arrays aligned, frequencies tuned for modern composite shielding, and fired in synchronized cadence at a range of 21,000 kilometers. The beams struck the lead human ship squarely. White-blue light flooded the hull, saturating sensors and washing the battle space in glare. Council tacticians waited for the sequence they had memorized over centuries. Shield bloom, harmonic fracture, cascading failure. Instead, the glare thinned and fell away. The ship remained. Vector unchanged. Mass intact. No penetration. Damaged telemetry populated and stalled. Thermal rise registered, then flattened. Radiation leakage dropped below background levels in 0.7 seconds. Hull integrity held at 99.97%, the loss attributed to intentional ablative shedding rather than breach. The ship's power curve did not spike or dip. It remained flat, stubborn, unconcerned. Analysts flagged sensor error. Calibration routines ran and returned clean. A second volley followed from 6 cruisers at 32%, frequencies staggered, to induce resonance collapse. The beams overlapped, saturating the target volume with energy sufficient to cripple a Council battleship twice over. The human hull absorbed it again, armor plates blackened and sloughed away in controlled layers, revealing identical strata beneath. Energy refracted through internal voids, bled laterally, and dumped into heat sinks buried deep within the ship's frame. Structures the Council had mocked as crude seams vented charge in measured plumes. Absorption efficiency stabilized at 95.4%. 95.4. Doctrine faltered. The Council had no table for a target that treated primary weapons as thermal load. Orders escalated automatically. A battleship-class emitter fired at 58%, violating multiple safety margins. The impact lit the void for nearly 4 seconds, casting hard shadows across nearby hulls. When the light cleared, the human ship was still there. External damage was visible now: scoring, missing plates, exposed superstructure. But nothing vital. Internal temperatures peaked and dropped in clean cycles. Crew life signs held steady at 2,118. No evasive burn, no counterfire. The ship endured, square to the threat. They built for this. The observation leaked from a junior officer before discipline caught it. It was logged anyway, flagged as emotional anomaly. Council weapons began to suffer first. At 64% output, 2 cruisers reported emitter degradation. At 71, a third broke formation to vent plasma, its captain filing a damage report that listed target non-compliance as causal factor. During the pause, long-range plots shifted. 68 human signatures adjusted vectors by fractions of a degree, acceleration curves rising smoothly from idle. Distance counters ticked down from 3.1 million kilometers to 2.7. Council tacticians read the movement as retreat preparation. It fit their expectations. A narrow-band transmission cut through the noise, unencrypted and deliberate. It displayed impact graphs, absorption curves, and a single line of text time-stamped to the last volley. Efficiency acceptable, it read. Silence. Followed. The Council authorized one final demonstration strike at 82%, intent sliding from instruction to enforcement. As capacitors charged, an elder strategist stared at the flattened absorption curve and felt certainty give way to calculation. If this was acceptable damage, then Earth had not merely survived. It had learned. Across the void, human ships continued their slow, deliberate acceleration, armor still steaming faintly as if inviting the Council to prove the same point again. They advanced while the Council was still charging weapons. Human acceleration curves shifted from idle to intent in smooth, unforgiving lines. No flares, no theatrics. Drives spooled as if mass itself had decided to move. Council sensors recalibrated twice before accepting the numbers. Sustained acceleration climbed past 9G, then 11, then settled into a stable plateau between 11 and 12G. At that load, Council physiology failed in seconds. Hull frames twisted, crews blacked out. The human ships showed none of it. Inertial compensation held, life signs remained level. The lead vessel crossed from 21,000 kilometers to 17,500 in moments, vector locked, profile square to the threat. It was not dodging fire. It was shortening the problem. Then the rest of the fleet moved. 68 human signatures bloomed across the tactical display, each entering a distinct acceleration ramp. Vectors diverged and converged with deliberate asymmetry, carving paths, through volumes Council doctrine reserved for safety margins. The dispersion that had looked like weakness resolved into structure as distances collapsed from millions of kilometers to hundreds of thousands. Council captains ordered corrections to preserve elegant arcs. Those orders collided almost immediately. One cruiser rolled to maintain firing geometry and cut across another's path. A destroyer burned hard to clear a lane and found a human frigate already occupying it, sliding past at relative velocity high enough to strip sensor vanes clean. Off. Fire control solutions lagged as targeting computers struggled to track acceleration profiles that did not peak or pulse, but held steady, relentless. They're coming straight in. At 12G, the humans did not outrun Council weapons. They outran Council assumptions. Engagement envelopes collapsed. Reaction times shrank below safe margins. Energy coherence degraded as ranges fell under 10,000 kilometers, where beam dispersion increased and dwell times shortened. The Council fired anyway, lances cutting brilliant paths through space the human ships no longer occupied. Distance counters ticked down in hard numerals. 14,000 kilometers. 10,600. 8,200. Human ships threaded gaps measured in tens of kilometers, timing separations in fractions of a second. No collisions, no hesitation. The battle space lost symmetry as Council formations bent under proximity pressure, forced to choose between colliding with allies or surrendering position. At 5,000 kilometers, the lead human ship cut thrust and pivoted broadside to 3 Council cruisers at once. The maneuver should have torn it apart. It did not. Inertial systems absorbed the vector change. Crew vitals stayed flat. Council gunnery solutions updated too late, beams lancing through vacuum the ship had already abandoned. An elder strategist saw the pattern and understood too late. The humans were not breaking formations with fire, they were breaking them with timing. Every acceleration, every cutoff, every fractional degree adjustment forced a reaction. Reactions compounded. Errors stacked. Space shrank. At 3,400 kilometers, the human lattice settled into firing geometry. Weapon ports irised open along spines and flanks, dark and unapologetic. Council command vessels found themselves bracketed by converging vectors they could not escape without tearing their own fleet apart. A withdrawal corridor was ordered. The command propagated cleanly. It arrived after the geometry had already closed it. Human ships held acceleration for another 4 seconds, then stabilized, positions locking with surgical precision. The numbers stopped changing. The situation did not. The distance was gone. The next phase was inevitable. The first kill was solved before it was fired. Human fire control waited as distances stabilized inside 3,400 kilometers, where vectors hardened and probabilities stopped drifting. Council command ships struggled to realign, elegant hulls turning too slowly, boxed in by their own escorts and the closing lattice. Target confirmations stacked in quiet columns. No urgency, no debate. Then the railguns spoke. There was no warning glow, no crescendo. 6 tungsten penetrators left the lead battleship's spinal rails at a measured fraction of light speed, spaced 0.11 seconds apart to defeat prediction algorithms trained on energy blooms. Council sensors registered impacts before commanders realized weapons had discharged. The first round punched through layered shielding, ignored decorative superstructure, and exited through the command core. The second followed the same path with trivial deviation. Pressure collapsed. Power died in sequence. 1. The ship split. Along stress lines it had never been designed to endure, atmosphere venting in a clean, violent plume. Crew life signs dropped from 12,004 to 0 in under 5 seconds. The wreckage tumbled, still broadcasting authority codes to an audience that no longer existed. Missiles followed, not in salvos, but in arithmetic. Human destroyers released them in counted groups, 8, then 8 again, each with distinct guidance logic. Some burned hot and obvious, drawing defensive fire. Others coasted cold, invisible until terminal phase. Council point defenses tracked, the loud ones and celebrated intercepts as markers flashed green. The quiet missiles arrived untouched. At 2,700 kilometers, a second command vessel attempted a desperate roll, exposing its ventral plane. 3 railgun rounds arrived through that opening, spaced to exploit pressure differentials as bulkheads failed. A fourth followed milliseconds later, delayed by design. The ship's gravity ring sheared free and continued spinning, intact and useless, while the hull collapsed inward around it. 2. Council admirals shouted for a withdrawal corridor, but the geometry offered none. Human ships occupied the vectors required to escape, holding position with calm precision. A third command vessel fired wildly, energy lances splashing across empty space as its gunners tried to force an opening. A human cruiser answered with missiles carrying limited-yield nuclear charges, detonated at calculated standoff distances. The blasts were shaped and directional, tuned to annihilate sensor arrays and fracture internal structure without vaporizing the hull outright. The vessel went dark, drifting, systems dead but frame mostly intact. Boarding transponders flashed briefly, then went silent as human fire control excluded the target. "We count before we fire." The phrase appeared on auxiliary channels, flagged by coalition monitors as a doctrinal artifact. Council analysts barely then noticed. Too much was failing at once. Escorts surged to shield what leadership remained, but the screen dissolved under kinetic pressure. Railgun fire did not saturate space. It selected. Each shot removed a ship that mattered. Lesser vessels were ignored, allowed to live long enough to understand the pattern forming around them. At 2,100 kilometers, a cluster of Council cruisers attempted to ram a human frigate, trading mass for disruption in a maneuver born of panic. The frigate adjusted thrust by 0.5 G, slid aside, and let the cruisers collide with one another. Human sensors logged the event as environmental hazard neutralization. No weapons fired. The battle clock crossed 29 minutes. Council command coherence fell below 42%. Fleet-wide orders degraded into local guesses. Human losses remained unchanged. 0 destroyed hulls, 5 damaged, none mission killed. Ammunition tallies updated in clean columns. 52 railgun rounds expended, 24 confirmed kills, 4 command vessels erased, 1 disabled for capture. A narrow-band transmission followed, unencrypted and unemotional. Primary command neutralized. It read, "Secondary objectives pending." Resistance collapsed unevenly after that. Some captains fought on until emitters overheated or hulls failed. Others powered down and broadcast surrender codes across every frequency they could reach. Human systems acknowledged each automatically, flipping markers from red to green and stripping surrendered ships from targeting solutions mid-flight. At 36 minutes, the firing stopped. Not because the Council fleet was gone, but because the arithmetic was finished. Human ships held position, railguns silent, missiles cold, the wreckage of once untouchable flagships drifting between them like solved equations. The guns went quiet because someone told them to. At 36 minutes and 18 seconds, every human firing solution cleared simultaneously. Rail capacitors bled charge into sinks, missile. Guidance went cold. Across the fractured battle space, Council crews waited for the next calculation and did not receive it. Instead, a transmission propagated outward from the human flagship, unencrypted, riding every military and civilian relay until it saturated the system. The image was unchanged. A human officer stood on a functional bridge, posture steady, expression unreadable. "Hostilities are suspended," they said. "This is a legal broadcast." Council commanders expected demands. They received statutes. First, the officer. Continued, and data panes unfolded beside the frame. The practice of sentient slavery is prohibited. Effective immediately. Any vessel, installation, or authority engaged in ownership, transport, or processing of sentient beings is designated a criminal enterprise. Across Council hulls, registry alarms triggered as cargo manifests lit red. Labor holds that had never appeared on tactical overlays did so now, flagged and counted. Second, the officer said, surrender is protected. Any ship that powers down offensive systems, transmits standard distress and surrender codes, and holds position will not be fired upon. Boarding actions will be conducted only to secure weapons and render aid. We do not kill prisoners. The line echoed across channels and displays. Human fire control made it real. Targeting solutions peeled away mid-flight as ships powered down, markers flipping from red to green without exception. Third, the officer said, There will be trials. The word landed without emphasis. Command authority does not exempt individuals from accountability. Evidence has been recorded, jurisdiction will be asserted, sentences will be imposed by courts. A council legal delegate attempted to interrupt, invoking ancient accords and emergency powers. The transmission did not pause. Sovereignty does not extend to extermination, the officer replied. Accords that permit it are void. Numbers scrolled beneath the image, precise and unadorned. Enslaved populations identified, 6.3 million. Vessels flagged for seizure, 392. Command personnel designated for detention pending trial, 226. Humanitarian transfer window, 72 hours. Human ships moved again, not toward targets, but toward survivors. Boarding craft launched in controlled intervals, medics visible through viewports, weapon safeties engaged. Damage control drones swarmed crippled hulls to stabilize atmospheres and prevent cascading failures. A human destroyer adjusted thrust by 0.3 G to shield a powerless council cruiser from drifting debris. This is restraint, the officer concluded without flourish. Vengeance is not policy, they said. Law is. The transmission ended. In the silence that followed, council crews confronted a reality their doctrine had never prepared them for. The battle had not ended because humanity was finished, but because it had decided the objective no longer required killing. Surrender signals multiplied. Green markers spread. Human weapons stayed cold. Across the system, the shift was unmistakable. Violence had stopped not from exhaustion, but from choice, and that choice carried consequences measured not in explosions, but in trials yet to come. The B. Confirmation did not come from human channels. It emerged in coalition analysis rooms scattered across neutral space, where observers replayed the engagement without the assumptions that had blinded the council. When the timelines were stripped of rhetoric and reduced to motion, the conclusions settled with uncomfortable clarity. None of this had been improvised. Human fleet positions at first contact aligned too precisely with ancient transit corridors, routes, abandoned millennia ago, dismissed as inefficient by modern navies. Acceleration profiles matched tolerances no contemporary species trained for. Weapon cycling times reflected logistics chains designed for isolation, not resupply. The patterns did not suggest recovery. They suggested continuity. Coalition archivists went deeper. They pulled sealed records predating the Council's current charter, from probe arrays left to decay and libraries no one had indexed in thousands of years. Earth's extermination appeared, again and again, not as an endpoint, but as a gap. Trade routes terminated cleanly. Traffic logs ended without distress signals. Military encounters vanished from summaries as if redacted by habit rather than order. They didn't go extinct, a coalition historian said quietly. They withdrew under fire. Sensors confirmed it once the right filters were applied. Beneath background radiation and civilian noise, dormant infrastructure lit up across multiple regions. Fuel depots hollowed into cometary bodies. Ammunition caches buried in dead moons. Maintenance docks disguised as survey platforms, carbon-dated far older than any surviving council installation. The numbers forced recalibration, then forced it again. 4,000 years. Human doctrine fragments, long dismissed as theoretical, or outdated, suddenly aligned with observed behavior. Kinetic weapons were not nostalgia. They were independence. Slugs could be fabricated anywhere. Armor could be repaired without rare fields. Crews could be conditioned under constant stress, trained for sustained acceleration that coalition physiology could not survive. Humanity had optimized for survival after extermination, not for comfort within empire. This was not a return. It was a re-emergence. Coalition tacticians overlaid recent battle data with older anomalies, unexplained fleet losses, systems that went dark and were never claimed, patrols that failed to return without escalation. The signatures matched too closely to ignore. Humanity had been active in the deep margins, enforcing something quietly, long before Earth's coordinates reappeared. They weren't hiding, someone said. They were hardening. Political analysts ran projections. and found no scenario where this preparation was limited to the Council. Supply lines extended across regions labeled irrelevant. Fleet positions aligned with choke points that only mattered if threats older and larger than Imperial overreach existed. The legal broadcast, viewed through this lens, was not reactive. It was procedural, rehearsed across centuries. Coalition channels filled with encrypted traffic. Neutral systems reopened treaties signed under fear. Defense postures shifted. Requests for human legal frameworks appeared. Tentative at first, then formal. Gravity was changing, not through conquest, but credibility. In the wreckage of Council, Command survivors asked how Earth had survived extermination. Coalition observers had the answer, and it unsettled them more than the battle itself. Humanity had not waited for permission to return. It had waited until it was ready. Neutralization began the moment resistance became inefficient. Human fire control reclassified the remaining Council vessels in real time, hostile, surrendered, undecided, and acted only on the first. The distinction was absolute. Green-marked ships were excluded even when they drifted through optimal firing solutions. Red-marked ones received no further warnings. Missile bays opened across the human formation. This time there was no restraint arithmetic, only sufficiency. Waves launched in disciplined silence, hundreds of signatures blooming and fading as guidance. Systems alternated between hot burn and cold coast. The missiles did not converge on a single target. They flowed, dividing and recombining, saturating volumes of Space Council doctrine had never treated as lethal simultaneously. Point defenses engaged by reflex and failed by design. Interceptors chased decoys. Real warheads slid through blind, arcs created by earlier panic maneuvers and collapsed formations. At 6,400 kilometers, the first heavy cruiser broke apart under kinetic impact, its engines still firing as internal overpressure tore the hull open. At 5,900, another lost power and rolled helplessly, its crew broadcasting surrender codes seconds too late to cancel fire already committed by logic gates that did not bargain. The cascade spread. Council captains were fighting alone now. Command coherence fractured beyond recovery. Some powered down immediately, transmitting surrender on every channel they could reach. Human systems acknowledged each within milliseconds, hull markers flipping from red to green as missiles peeled away mid-course and retargeted without hesitation. Others hesitated, waiting for orders that never came. They did not survive the wait. Do not fire on green. The directive pulsed constantly across human channels. It was obeyed even when green-marked ships drifted into perfect geometry against still hostile targets. Gunners adjusted, sacrificing efficiency to preserve principle. The choice cost minutes. No one objected. Boarding actions followed behind the missile waves, not as punishment, but as control. Human cutters approached disabled hulls at relative, velocities measured in centimeters per second. Grapples locked, breach teams entered in pairs, weapons slung low, medics between them. Compartments were sealed rather than cleared. Atmospheres were vented only where resistance persisted. Most resistance ended when power failed and gravity returned at human-set tolerances. At 24 minutes into the phase, a Council carrier attempted a mass launch, dumping strikecraft in a desperate bid to overwhelm point defenses. Human response was precise and impersonal. Defense grids engaged not to annihilate, but to corral. Electromagnetic pulses shaped the flow of fighters into narrowing cones, frying guidance systems without breaching cockpits. Hundreds of craft tumbled powerless, pilots alive, instruments dead. Recovery beacons activated automatically. Surrender cascade. Coalition observers logged the phenomenon as it unfolded. Once a critical mass of Council ships powered down and survived intact, the rest followed. Crews watched neighboring hulls live through surrender and drew conclusions faster than doctrine ever could. At 47 minutes, surrendered vessels outnumbered hostile ones 3-1. At 61, 5-1. The last organized resistance formed around a crippled logistics tender, a knot of heavy cruisers attempting to build a defensive ring out, of habit rather than hope. Human analysis flagged the maneuver as emotionally driven. Missile fire softened the ring without collapsing it. Railgun shots punched precise holes through power cores. The tender was disabled without rupture. Boarding teams secured it and immediately began evacuating non-combatants. Throughout the engagement, the human flagship held central position, its mass anchoring the geometry. Railguns fired sparingly now, each shot deliberate, removing ships that threatened to destabilize the surrender perimeter. Ammunition tallies updated in clean columns, missiles expended 361, railgun rounds 29 additional, nuclear charges 0 in this phase. Human losses remained unchanged. At 79 minutes, the final hostile marker flickered and turned green. The battle space did not erupt in celebration. It simply quieted. Hundreds of council hulls drifted in ordered clusters, weapons cold, crews waiting. Human ships moved among them like custodians, dispatching repair drones, establishing traffic lanes, preventing collisions between powerless vessels. Boarding tallies stabilized. Prisoners secured, 6.1 million. Injured treated, 512,000. Fatalities ceased entirely once the last hostile designation cleared. A council officer aboard a surrendered cruiser watched a human frigate adjust thrust by 0.2 G to shield their hull from drifting debris and felt certainty collapse into something else. Not relief, not fear, recognition. The council fleet had not been annihilated. It had been dismantled, decision by decision, vector by vector, until fighting no longer served any purpose. Human Command logged the phase complete and shifted focus to humanitarian transfer and legal processing. Violence ended not with exhaustion, but with sufficiency. Judgment began with care, not cages. Human cutters docked with surrendered hulls according to a queue that ignored rank and favored need. Atmospheres were stabilized first, then gravity, then medical access. Injured council crew were triaged without comment, species tags flashing briefly before dissolving into the same priority schema. Painkillers flowed, fractures were set, bleeding stopped. The process was fast, practiced, and conspicuously indifferent to uniforms. No reprisals. The directive carried the same authority as a fire command. Human Marines escorted prisoners with weapons slung low, restraints applied only where resistance had already occurred. Those who complied walked unbound. Those who did not were isolated, recorded, and transferred without spectacle. Every interaction generated data, biometrics, testimony, command lineage, fed into a legal system already live and waiting. Detention habitats unfolded from cargo holds, modular and sterile. Nutrition met dietary requirements calculated down to trace elements. Translators rendered instructions in calm, neutral tones. Prisoner counts stabilized at 6.1 million. Fatalities did not increase. The numbers mattered, and the humans treated them like commitments rather than estimates. Across the system, civilian traffic resumed under human advisories. Relief convoys jumped in along pre-cleared vectors, bearing insignia from worlds that had never publicly aligned with Earth. Coalition observers watched the manifests populate and recognized the pattern. Neighboring systems were not waiting to be coerced. They were choosing. Declarations arrived in orderly bursts. Suspension of council tribute, opening of ports to human oversight, requests for arbitration under the same statutes broadcast during the battle. Political gravity shifted, not with speeches, but with filings and signatures. Authority bled away through paperwork faster than it ever had through force. We accept these terms. The phrase appeared again and again, identical wording traced back to the law broadcast template. Analysts flagged it as mimetic adoption. Human. Command did not respond. Acceptance required no applause. Trials were scheduled before the last boarding team completed extraction. Jurisdiction packets listed charges with unemotional clarity: extermination, enslavement, unlawful processing, command responsibility. Evidence hashes linked sensor logs, intercepted orders, and testimony collected in real time. Command personnel, flagged earlier, 226 individuals, were separated and transferred under guard that neither tightened when they struggled nor softened when they pleaded. A council governor attempted to negotiate amnesty in exchange for immediate realignment. The response came from a human legal officer, not a commander. Alignment does not erase crimes, they said. The channel closed. Inside the habitats, rumors spread faster than fear. Crews compared treatment. They noticed that surrender had worked exactly as promised. They noticed that no compartments had been flooded, no executions staged to make examples, no retaliatory punishments delivered for insults shouted in panic. The lessons settled unevenly, then stayed. At 96 hours, the first liberated populations were transferred off seized vessels. Families emerged into gravity they had not chosen, blinking under lights tuned for comfort rather than efficiency. Civilian agencies took over as human medics stepped aside, their role complete. The human flagship remained on station, scarred armor patched with clean plates that did not hide the damage. Its commander filed a final operational note. Force implied. Judgment commenced. Restraint maintained. In distant systems, leaders weighed the cost of defiance against the evidence now flowing through every relay. The choice was no longer theoretical. Humanity had not returned hate for extermination. It had returned law and shown without spectacle how judgment looked when vengeance was unnecessary. The quiet felt wrong to those who knew what to listen for. Debris fields were mapped and nudged into decay paths. Traffic lanes reopened under human advisories. Trial schedules propagated with the same priority once reserved for firing solutions. From a distance, the system looked orderly again, as if extermination and judgment had been brief interruptions in a longer ledger. Human sensors did not stand down. Deep-range arrays continued to sweep beyond the rim. Baselines stretched across. Millions of kilometers, tuned to patterns that did not belong to trade or war. At 141 hours post-engagement, one array returned a signal that refused classification. It was faint, persistent, and asymmetrical. Not a fleet, not a probe, but a pressure in space-time that suggested mass in motion without conventional drives. Analysts reran the data. The anomaly held. The source lay far beyond charted lanes, at a distance measured in 70,000 astronomical units, approaching on a vector that ignored jump corridors entirely. Emission profiles flickered between states, as if the object disagreed with observation itself. Cross-referenced against sealed archives and half-erased records, the match tightened. Old extinction events, vanished systems. The same distortion, recorded and dismissed as coincidence. This time, it aligned with Earth. A file, long buried under the extermination ruling, surfaced in human systems, unlocked by biometric keys older than the Council. The timestamps matched. 4,000 years ago, when Earth burned, this signal had passed through the outer dark on the same trajectory. It had not attacked directly. It had culled. It had triggered the conditions that made the Council's vote possible. The same signature. Human command convened without alarms. No broadcasts interrupted relief operations. The information moved along channels that had existed before Earth's fall, contingency headers unlocking without debate. Timelines populated. Ammunition tallies updated. The numbers were not comforting, but they were known. A coalition observer, cleared under emergency protocol, asked a single question. Is it coming here? The human reply was measured. It is always coming, they said. It never stops. Across the system, human ships adjusted station by fractions of a degree, mass and sensors aligning into a configuration older than the Council's oldest maps. Messages went out to systems that had already chosen Earth's law, carrying no threats, only data and timelines. Beyond the rim, the enemy that killed Earth continued its approach, indifferent to mercy, law, or memory, humanity. Watched it with practiced calm and prepared to finish a war that had started 4,000 years earlier.